Wonderful. Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining us. Welcome to an engaging faculty panel introducing the broad foundational areas of the Evans School MPA core curriculum. My name is Alejandra Pena. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I serve as the advising and outreach manager for the Evans School. But today is not about me. It's about you all, and I'm so thrilled to be here today, joined by our fabulous faculty who are here to talk about the foundations of the Masters of Public Administration program. Today, we will learn how our program equips you as emerging leaders with the skills to drive meaningful change in public service. Now, in a moment, I will individually introduce our fabulous faculty, and they will each take about 5 minutes each to provide an overview into their core area within the MPA program. We do ask that you please save your questions towards the end, as once we've touched on all our different areas today, but we will then have time for a Q&A with our faculty. But as questions come up, please feel free to jot them down so you can bring them up, and we will do those accordingly. And then after the faculty Q&A, we'll also provide a brief presentation of the application process, so you can also get your questions answered directly by our admission staff. So whether you're exploring graduate school or preparing to apply, this is really a great opportunity to see how your goals and values align with the Evans MPA experience. But before we dive in, here at the University of Washington, we start every session with a land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of the tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The Evans School acknowledged that we are the traditional land on the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Now, to start us off, please welcome Inez Jurjevic to discuss our management and leadership aspect of our core. Take it away.
Make sure to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time and kind of feeding your curiosity to understand what this program is about. I think that's such a huge step of picking the right program for you. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about our management and leadership course sequence. So the courses at the MPA are really thinking about how do we lead a more effective public sector. And part of that is thinking about how do we manage effectively, thinking about people in organizations situated within a broader political landscape. And I'd say little p political in terms of thinking about how do we navigate these processes in a constructive and equitable way. And so our management sequence is really focused on thinking about the organization looking out. So an organization in the broader landscape, and how do we think about opportunities and policy windows? How do we think about ethics and public values, and how that informs the decisions and policies that get made? We also think a lot about leadership and followership, right? It's, both are equally important in developing a kind of a productive public space. And then the classes also take that same organization and we turn our lens inward, where we think a lot about how do we manage the day-to-day experience of working in public sector. So what does it mean to manage people? Think about goals and accountability. How do we think about performance? What are the trade-offs in what we measure, how we measure it, and what are the consequences of that for how the organization does its work? And we do all this with this idea of an organizational culture change, right? So that's kind of the big frame here is what are the pieces of the puzzle that we need to tie together for the changes that we want to see in organizations to be both sustainable and equitable over the long run. With that, we also teach you how to communicate your thinking. So a huge part of the public management class is learning how to write a memo really effectively. It's going to be the hardest 2 pages you've ever written, but also the most kind of productive way of taking your thinking, narrowing it down, and communicating it really effectively. In these classes, we also bring in speakers to share their work and lived experiences in these spaces, really trying to bridge some of the theory and practical knowledge with the experience of how you'll use that knowledge. We also have case-based learning where we think about current and former cases of these types of events that are trying to learn about happening. We dissect those down, and each one offers a unique way of understanding the problems that we're tackling. We also bring in a lot of demonstrations. So if you happen to be in my sections or any of them, we do a lot of demonstrations, role plays, and the like to kind of try and embody some of those skills. Those are, I think, are the biggest parts of what it means to be in the management sequence. One of my favorite parts of it is that the knowledge that you gain is kind of immediately implementable. So as the quarters go, each week there's more and more students saying, I'm navigating this exact problem at work, and here's what I'm doing, and what else can I think about in terms of addressing the issues that I'm interested in. But I would say that's kind of the big piece of what it means to be in our management sequence. Alejandra, is there anything else you wanted me to share?
Oh, that is wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ennis. I know this is a pretty core part of our MPA program and what that looks like. A lot of folks are thinking about what it means to lead, be a manager, and be equitable too. And so thank you so much for sharing. Next up to discuss our quantitative methods aspect of the core, please welcome Crystal Hall.
Hello, everyone. I want to echo Ennis and just thank you all for taking some time to be a part of this session and get to know us and our curriculum a little bit more. I teach in our quantitative methods area. Just to give you a brief bit of background, I'm trained as an experimental psychologist. I study decision making. So a lot of the methods that I teach are methods that I use in my own work. And in this section of our curriculum, we really are grounded in this idea that we want you to be able to leave with some really important skills on, first and foremost, how to be a good consumer of research and quantitative methods. And we also get into the basics of how to produce quantitative analysis, but we really start from this place of what does it mean to be able to ask good questions about research findings and to consider what are the most important elements of quantitative methods and how they can help us lead to being able to engage in evidence-informed policy and policymaking. And we give you a foundation that you can take outside of the MPA, and you also have the opportunity to build on the foundations of what's in the core in our elective courses. So if you're someone that really is excited about deepening your skills as a producer of quantitative analysis, the core curriculum is really designed to also set you up for that. And so we start from these questions of how research and data collection generally are these activities that are not only socially constructed, but just these important tools for making sense of decision making in a policy context. And so we start by talking about the basics of descriptive and inferential statistics and understanding the distinction between them, both of them, and describing the trade-offs and how those skills can help support the design of evidence-informed, evidence-based policy. And also part of that discussion is describing some of the, not only the benefits, but also some of the drawbacks and the trade-offs of using quantitative analysis for decision making. And we talk about issues around, for example, how the quality of data and data sets are impacted by the way that those data are collected. And so we start there. We talk about the basics of how we define and interpret descriptive statistics, and then we move on to describing concepts like probability, which then leads us to being able to do some basic inferential statistical analysis. And so we get into confidence intervals and hypothesis testing, which might be concepts that you might already be familiar with. And then we move through other tools such as correlation and looking more at statistics of multiple variables, including regression techniques, and also the basics of randomized trials, causal methods, topics like that. You will learn a little bit about the basic of a statistical programming language. And again, it's really a foundation that can help you understand how these tools work with the interest with an interest in you being able to again, be a good consumer of research, but also providing a good foundation for those of you that want to go deeper into learning how to use those tools. And the last thing I'll say, which ties back to Ines' point, is that we also really want you to learn how to be able to communicate about basic statistical results for both a technical and non-technical audience, which is also really important in taking these tools and applying them to public policy. So again, thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I lost it, but thank you, Crystal. We've been having a lot of questions about quantitative methods and like one-on-ones with prospective students. I know there's some of you out there. And so it's really helpful to provide some clarity about what does quantitative methods like really mean when it comes to our program. So thank you. Next up to discuss our policy analysis aspect of the core, please welcome Grant Bloom.
Terrific. Thanks, Alejandra. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon. My name is Grant. I'm a faculty member here at the Evans School, and I'm going to mix things up a bit. So I'm going to go rogue and ask you to type something into your chat bar in a minute. And the thing that I'd like you to type into your chat bar, so I'm going to ask you to type it in, but not hit return. And then I'm going to tell you to hit return, and we're going to see everybody's responses all at once. How would you define public policy to an 8-year-old? So you've got a niece or a nephew or a son or a daughter or a neighbor kid, and they come home from school and they say, we were learning about public policy, but I don't understand. What is public policy? So type your definition into the chat bar. Don't hit return yet. But the question is, how would you define public policy? We'll give you about 15 seconds here. I've got the chat window open. And so what I'm going to do now is invite you to hit return, and let's see some definitions for how would you define public policy. I'll take just a minute here and great. Anna's the first one to chime in. Guidance made at different levels of government to better our community. Terrific. Hannah says rules and regulations. Christopher says how people and groups collaborate to create change. Terrific. Guidance for what decides law, giving a voice to the voiceless, terrific. Legislation, great. The rules and plans that leaders make to keep everybody safe and living well, terrific. This is a question that I often pose the first day of policy analysis when I teach this class. And what Liz just posted here is typical. I mean, all of you have great ideas. Rules and regulations. This is oftentimes what we think about public policy. Chase says what we choose to do or not do. So all of these are great. Here's one way I'm going to offer we can think about public policy, and that is that public policy is how government solves problems. And if public policy is how government solves problems, then it becomes really critical to understand how do we define a problem and who is at the table when the problem is defined. And when we define a problem, are we creating policy that addresses the problem's underlying root causes or simply addresses the problem's symptoms? And so if public policy is how government solves problems, then what policy analysis is this systematic way that we can look at the different options that government has to address the problem that we're focused on. And policy analysis is this way that we bring together evidence and research and voices and perspectives, and we embark on this systematic analysis where we define a policy problem. We then look at the options to address that problem. We carefully choose criteria that we will analyze those options by. So these criteria are things that you've heard of, like effectiveness, cost, feasibility, implementation feasibility, equity. And then we analyze the options and we look for the trade-offs to emerge. Because one of the things in policy analysis that I love is we never say that a policy is good or bad. We simply say that it has trade-offs. It might be very effective, but it also might carry a high cost. Or this policy might carry a low cost and be effective, but it's not very equitable when we look at who it serves and who it doesn't serve. So these are the kinds of things we do in policy analysis. It can feel deceivingly simple, but it is complex, and to do it well requires a lot of deep thinking. And so over the course of the quarter in policy analysis, we build this toolkit where we systematically learn to analyze policy problems. We learn about the different options that are out there in terms of policy tools, and then we analyze them. Students in class do a 10-week project, and in the 10-week project, they put together a topic of their choice. And what I love about this class is it's highly applicable to what you're going to do in other courses. It's highly applicable to the capstone experience that you'll have in your second year. And one of the most common titles that our alums have is analyst of some kind. And so they go out into the field and do this work in a variety of capacities at all levels of government, as you pointed out in the chat bar. So I love policy analysis because I think it's really a way for you to think differently about the world and think critically about public policy. And so I echo my colleagues in saying it's really great to have you here today, and I'd look forward to any questions you might have about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. And you never have to apologize for going rogue. So thank you for that interactive aspect of it. So thank you. Next up to discuss the economics aspect of the core, please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Victor.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, trying to unmute myself unsuccessfully. Well, I just want to join everybody else in thanking you all for taking the time to come and hear what we have to say. And we're all excited to be here and talk about what we teach and about the program. And so I hope you'll have lots of questions at the end. I teach in the economics sequence. Right now, I teach the second quarter of the two-course economic sequence. And the purpose of that sequence is to deepen students' understanding of microeconomic theory and develop their skills in applying it to public policy and management issues. So government decisions are fundamentally about how to allocate scarce resources to improve public welfare or the public well-being. So understanding economics is critical to help public administrators and policymakers make good policy choices and to avoid or minimize unintended consequences. So what we're doing in the economic sequence is we're trying to equip students with some analytical tools to design and implement and evaluate public policies that are effective, efficient, and equitable. And if that sounds a little bit like what Grant said, all of these things do tie together. So there's reason and there's logic to it. So we start out in the economic sequence with the foundation of understanding how markets can actually work efficiently, which you need to understand before thinking about ways that things can go wrong. But when markets fail to allocate goods and services in a way that's optimal for society, that's when there's a role for government or public policy intervention. And these are situations that real world policymakers and policy analysts face all the time. So some examples are dealing with situations where ownership rights are not clear, such as with the air or the ocean, making policy when there's imperfect information, such as like how do you assess the quality of a good, like your food? How do you know your food is safe? You can't tell just by looking at it. Spillovers to people who are not in the market, such as when a manufacturer dumps pollution into a river. These are all situations where policy action is needed. So in the econ sequence, we talk about a lot of different market failures, what causes them, different ways that you could address them. And then we move on and talk about how to make choices when we have uncertainty. So policy making is often done in an environment of uncertainty where we might not know exactly how things will play out for a variety of reasons. So we need to be thoughtful about making decisions that are optimal when that's the case. In terms of foundational skills, that pretty much sums it up. But just to reiterate, students are learning how to recognize and understand key market failures that lead to situations where public policy or government intervention is needed. Students learn how to predict what the outcomes will be without those interventions and what solutions are suggested by these outcomes. And then students also learn a framework for how to make the best choices when things are uncertain. So these are all really useful skills for pretty much any career, but also these concepts thread themselves throughout the curriculum, both in the core itself and also in the electives. There are several specifically economics related electives that you can take after this, but the general concepts sort of percolate throughout the curriculum. So happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Thank you. These are so great and impactful to like hear of these different foundational areas that we have. And so thank you so much. I'm just going to keep iterating for everyone, truly. So thank you, Elizabeth. Next up to discuss the finance aspect of the core, please welcome Sharon Kyoko.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this panel. And I hope to see you in Pub Paul 522 in fall next quarter, in the fall quarter. So I'm Sharon Kyoko. I'm faculty at the Evans School, and I teach the finance sequence. Really, mostly one class in the core and several electives that we offer. And what Grant mentioned, and I think Elizabeth alluded to, is thinking about all these policy problems that we have, but to solve those problems, we need resources, right? So we really need to think about how we're going to fund a particular agency responsible for providing access to affordable healthcare. We need to think about the agency that's going to be responsible for providing infrastructure to allow for economic development. So the 522 Financial Management and Budgeting course introduces you to the main sources of revenue for every level of government. So the federal government, state government, local government, and also thinking about smaller governments like school districts and utilities that provide you with electricity and water and garbage collection, and thinking about the different priority levels at each level of government, right? So county governments are responsible for managing elections and healthcare, and cities are mostly responsible for managing city government activities. So looking at housing, right? They're looking at making sure your streets are clean and making sure you have access to affordable services. So utilities are mostly at the city level. So trying to get an understanding of what the priorities are at each level of government. And that leads to an important aspect is how then do these governments create their budgets? And their budgets are a really statement of their values and their priorities, and making sure these governments maintain a long-term financial health, right? So we start looking at financial statements, helping you try to understand how you look at financial information, interpret financial information, and assess the financial health of a local government, a city, a state, a school district, and also think about what strategies are available to these governments in terms of addressing those policy concerns. We also look at nonprofits. So thinking about, big hospitals or small nonprofit that is mostly member driven. What are the challenges and opportunities those organizations may have? We then dive deeper into financial statements, thinking about how then that information comes together. And the reason why we do a little bit of accounting, and don't let this scare you from the course, is you have to understand how information comes together for you to make decisions. So if you're going to borrow money to finance a road or a bridge or the Capitol building or correctional facilities, you have to understand the implications of that borrowing on the financial health of that organization. That's thinking about strategy. So you have to understand financial information. You have to understand financial statements for you then to make better decisions. And we have several examples that we cover in class thinking about why this was a poor decision or why it was poorly informed and had resulted in tax hikes, which taxpayers don't like, or a cost increase in your utility bill, and you're trying to understand why is my utility bill so high. Something that Ines mentioned is focused on management. Finance is management. So oftentimes we think about management in terms of managing people, but management is also about managing money and making sure you have optimal solutions in managing the resources. You're using the money to hire a staff. You're using the money to generate the resources that you need to do your work, right? So whether you're contracting out to other nonprofits or contracting out to the private sector to get work done. So thinking about how do you effectively manage those resources is one of the key goals for the course. It's also very case-based driven, so we focus on giving you time to work through three large assignments so that you have some time to absorb the concepts and the materials, but also to be able to see how that's connected in real life. And what we do at the end of each quarter is invite recent graduates who are now working as budget analysts to talk about how the courses they took at the Evans School directly connect to the work that they're doing today. Most folks end up being very excited about the curriculum overall and how tangible it is. But again, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on financial management and budgeting in the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, that data-informed strategy is really helpful and beneficial for students to kind of understand more of the in-depth of the reasoning why we kind of have a more strong quantitative like math focus in our program. So thank you for highlighting that. And to round us out to discuss the program evaluation aspect of our core, please welcome Scott Allard.
Hey, thanks for everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking through the first half hour. I won't take too long. One of the things that motivates a lot of us to pursue training in public policy, public affairs, is we have a desire to have impact, to make change, to improve our communities, to support the communities that we come from and that we are connected to. And often that begs the question, are the programs, are the interventions, are the policies that we're delivering, providing, do they work? Do they matter? Do they have consequence in people's lives or in the lives of a community in the short term and in the long term? And if they aren't working, why is that? How do we make them better? How do we improve? And what program evaluation is, it's usually a class you take at the end of your first year. It's a class that helps us answer those questions. Do things work? And if not, why? And even though we're in a moment where evidence and research is under attack, everybody needs evidence. Everybody needs to engage evidence. Everybody needs to ask questions about impact. And everybody needs to understand kind of why things work or don't work. And it's true no matter what sector you end up working within, whatever career path you pick. So program eval is a course that kind of sums up a lot of what you get in the core throughout your first year. It presumes that you're a manager and a leader, as you all will be sooner than you realize upon finishing the program. It draws upon your quantitative skills, your sense of economic theory. It is nested within the problem definition framework that Grant outlined. And it's connected to how we spend money, because a lot of times we want to invest in things that work. And so it's really connected to Sharon's content around budgeting. We teach this class differently, I think, and this content differently than other schools in that we focus on rigor, but we often focus on mixed methods. So not just one way of knowing, but many different ways of knowing, many different ways of thinking about evidence. We think about causal evidence, but we think about other ways of knowing as well. But we also really lean into an equity lens with this content, which matters because too often in program evaluation work, there are a lot of voices that are silent or a lot of perspectives that aren't included. And one of the things we do in the core here is to try to surface those perspectives and those voices and think about how we can get at maybe historically marginalized or excluded communities. So this sets you up to do all kinds of good stuff, both in the core or in your elective courses in your second year, internships, jobs, capstones. It really is a great way to kind of help launch you into the work you want to do. It's skills focused. It helps you be a smarter consumer of research, kind of balancing the art and science of evaluation research. And it connects to a bunch of different topic areas. So you'll find content that fits your mobility agenda or your career path that you want to be on. And it's one of my favorite things to teach here at Evans, and I've been doing it for about 30 years, and I just love it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Alejandra and to your Q&A.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think it was such a natural way of like placing you towards the end to kind of help round us out too, because it really program evaluation is a synopsis of all these different aspects too. And so thank you. Now, we've covered quite a lot of content in our short amount of time that we've had already. And these overviews have maybe sparked some questions for you all. Before that, I would just like to say, can we please give a virtual round of applause to our phenomenal faculty for being with us today? Thank you, truly. Oh, yes, I forgot you can also react in Zoom. Fantastic. Thank you. That's really helpful. So we'll be moving into our Q&A shortly. As a reminder, as you have questions, please navigate to our Q&A feature below. I know sometimes it's a little hard to find it. So if you click on the more on the bottom of the screen, if you're not seeing it, you'll kind of see a list and then you'll see that Q&A pop up there. So just kind of helping navigate where to find that there. This is just so we can monitor the questions accordingly and answer questions as they come in. Sometimes in the chat, they get kind of, lost in the sauce, as kids say. And so if you need to, if you want to be anonymous or if you need to, you can message me directly on Zoom if you can't find that Q&A feature. But while we're waiting for some questions for our panelists, one question that I always like to start off with is, what is something that inspires you or excites you when you're in the classroom with your MPA students? And I'll give some folks, our panelists, some ideas, to think about there, but I'm going to pick on Ennis first, if that's okay. Whenever you're ready, no
I'm
rush.
happy to
Also,
answer, but I also see that maybe Hannah has a question. I don't know if we want to do that.
yeah, sure, we can do that. Also, yes. Let's see. Oh, it looks like we have Hannah and Anna raising hand. Let's see. So we'll start with Anna and then Hannah will get right to you. Anna is wondering, curious if you could speak about the capstone experience and what they might look like for students.
I've taught capstone a handful of times, so I'm happy to provide a few quick
Wonderful. Thanks,
points
Grant.
here. Sure. So capstone is really exciting because it provides students an opportunity to work with a real life client who's been vetted by the Evans School and has proposed a project where they need a team of MPA students to help them tackle a problem or a challenge that they face. And these projects are really diverse. So they are in the environmental space, the health and human services space, they are management problems, policy projects. They really span the gamut. And historically, capstone has been 2 quarters. And so it really provides an opportunity for students to dig into this experience. You work in small teams. You have a faculty member who supervises you for the 2 quarters that you work on the project. You meet with the client on a regular basis. And at the end of the experience, you develop a deliverable based on the client's needs. And you actually provide that to the client, oftentimes uh, in a meeting on site with the client and stakeholders from that organization. So it's a really amazing way to get applied experience in a relatively low stakes environment before you go out into the professional world and do work on your own. And I would say the other really cool thing about capstone is it gives you something really tangible to talk about when you're interviewing then for jobs or when you're looking for internships. And so our career services folks are always really terrific in terms of helping students think about the way they're going to put this on their resume and the way that they're going to talk about capstone during interviews or in application letters to potential employers. So in that way, the capstone also provides a really terrific launching pad into whatever your post-Evans School career might be. So that was a quick overview, but there's more on our website about capstone, and it, like I said, it comes in the second year. It's a really powerful learning experience, and really amazing to see the work that students do over the course of 2 quarters in small teams.
Thank you, Grant. I think that was beautifully eloquented also. So thank you for providing that overview. And that's really just a small sampling of how impactful and how our students really enjoy this experience and that collaboration too. And so it's like one of the things that makes me super jazzed about our students just got assigned to their capstones for winter. So, so exciting. I did see Hannah has raised a hand for quite some time. So Hannah, if you'd like to unmute and ask your questions live, you can do that as well.
Thank you so much. I'll start by just lowering my hand so others can raise. Thank you for everyone taking your time to tell us this very important information that could help us in making our decision. So I am a prospective student, and currently I am trying to decide which discipline is great for the research idea that I have. I already have a research idea more so focused on seeing the relationship in between a currency and an economy, as well as the policy making or the policies that are being made by a country or an economy, I guess. So, given that we have professors both in economy, finance, and in public policy, again, if you guys can say, if you wish for me to say more about the research idea, I definitely can. I know there are a handful of people here that also wish to ask their questions, so that's why I'm not getting deep in it. But again, to just highlight the idea of the research is more so of seeing the relationship and finding if there is a causality in between the currency of a country or a currency of an economy or a couple economies. I'm originally from Africa, so those are the economies that I'm more interested about knowing. So the currencies of an economy or economies, how would that affect the quality of life with respect to the policies that are being made within those economies. So those are kind of the aspects that I wish to those are the curiosities, at least that I have, that I wish to answer. So I'm trying to see which discipline is good. So that's why I'm here, I guess, in simple words. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah, or Hannah. I want to make sure if I say that correctly. Any of our folks want to address Hannah's question?
I can say something. I don't know if Sharon also wants to chime in or anyone else. So it sounds to me like the area that you're interested in is taking a more macro approach. When we think about currencies in particular, that is more of a macroeconomic approach. And most MPA programs and MPP programs take more of a micro approach to things. So I don't know if that is helpful for you in thinking about what discipline is appropriate. I do think that some of the questions you're interested in can still be answered by the tools that you can learn here. There's a lot of general analytical and critical thinking skills that you could apply to answering some of the questions you're interested in. But we don't have many, if any, and again, others can chime in on this, courses that are more macro focused.
Yeah, just to add on to that, yes, we are more micro-focused than macro-focused. I think if you're really interested in macro, departments of economics will probably be a better fit for you. But just to give you some additional information on the micro side, I think it's important to understand what the impact of tax policy is on an economy, right? So when you think about value of a currency, the value of a currency is based on the level of economic activity, and the level of economic activity is going to be determined by whether there's conflict or not, which is a broader question, but more narrowly is thinking about how then is the government building infrastructure to support economic development. So do you have good roads? Do you have water? Do you have electricity? Do you have reliable electricity coming from sub-Saharan Africa? And thinking about how then do you build an economy, and the stronger the economy, then the stronger the currency. So it really just depends on how you want to look, which lens you're approaching that. I tend to teach more management. So how do you manage money rather than how do you think about policy? But we do have faculty. Dr. Cohen teaches an excellent class on taxation and social policy. So we do have courses where we are thinking about the different types of taxes and how you use taxes for economic development and how you use taxes to address income inequality. So you can find what you're looking for, but not necessarily from a macro perspective. It's going to be more micro. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I think these are really interesting questions that you phrased, and frankly, it sounds like you want to do something about them, and you want to lead, and you want to make change. And I don't actually think macroeconomists do that very effectively. So I would encourage you to think about places where you could pursue a career that allows you to make change. Um, One of the things that I think we all work here, both as faculty and as students, is we kind of have these larger questions that frame our identity and frame what we want to accomplish. And that's what I heard in the questions you posed. And then we often try to figure out along the way, well, what are the pieces we can answer now? What are the parts we can work on? You kind of have this larger goal in mind, but there's a path along the way. And I think our school is we do this with all our students. This is the work that we do with everybody. Um, and kind of complementing what Elizabeth and Sharon said, there's going to be a lot of coursework that will be relevant, substantive coursework. We have a lot of scholars who focus on Africa and sub-Saharan Africa in particular. But the questions you ask will be things that people will be pondering in one way or another at different levels of geography, perhaps. So I'm excited to learn more. I hope you join our community.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we have some folks in the chat, so I've been going kind of like back and forth also. But we have a question from folks who are curious if you are okay with them reaching out to you in the future, but primarily they're very interested in maybe what kind of research that you are currently doing or have done in the past.
I can jump in first.
Crystal.
Yeah, I'll put my email address here in the chat as well. I mentioned this at the beginning. I'm trained as I'm a psychologist. I studied public policy and management as an undergraduate, along with decision science, and then studied social psychology for my master's and my PhD. And the research that I'm really interested in is centered around questions about how psychology and behavioral science more generally can be a tool for how we think about the design and implementation and evaluation of policy. And I got into the work initially thinking a lot about financial decision making and understanding how exploring the psychology of financial decision making can tie to anti-poverty efforts, for example. And more recently, I've really expanded that to think more about how the field of behavioral science can really explore and operationalize concerns of equity in those spaces. So I've thought a lot about anti-racism, but also equity more generally, and thinking about how do we have a field that focuses a lot on the individual, which psychology does, but how can we go down that path of thinking about individual decision making, but also consider how social contexts and institutions also impact the way we think about equity. And so that's something that was really heavily influenced by teaching MPA students. And I got to teach a new course on this topic. And then it really started to seep more into how I was thinking about research questions and the conversations that go on with people in my field. So if any of that is interesting, I'm very happy to chat. So please feel free to reach out.
Maybe I'll go second just because I have to leave to go teach, of all things, right? And as a nice segue, I am like the other social psychologist on the faculty. And so for me, I really think about the public sector as being something that's designed by people and for people. And so my fundamental orientation to a lot of the questions that I ask is if we can understand people better and their values, their identities, things that are amazing about them and flawed about them, then we can build a better public sector. that works for people and how it kind of helps them thrive. So my work really thinks centrally around how individual processes around identities, values, and biases shape how we think about difference and how we think about then remedies to address inequities that account for difference. And so I think a lot about how organizations promote, sustain, or try and make changes around equity efforts, and really thinking about how people's identities shape a lot of that work. So a lot of my work looks at race, gender, and other intersecting identities to think about what are the processes that you experience when an organization says that they want to try and make change that centers equity and inclusion? And then how do we think about sustaining some of those changes? And then my work more generally is just always thinking about how people perceive, navigate, and interpret their world, and how understanding that lets us develop and design a better public sector that works for people. And so with that, I'm going to put my information in the chat, and I'm more than happy to chat with anybody if that's interesting. And then I'm going to go teach, which I'm so excited to do. So I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and holidays. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ines. We really appreciate your time today. So thank you. Yes, I know we're kind of wrapping up on time here, but we do have a question I want to see is a student wondering about what makes a student successful at the Evans School and how do they like stand out potentially? But I would love to kind of focus on what it means to be successful at Evans, if anyone would like to chime in.
I can start. I think one way to think about standing out is just continued engagement in the classroom. That to me is so important, is I get to know you in the classroom and you engage with me in the process of asking questions, whether it's clarifying something or, asking me to explore a topic more deeply. So I think the best way to get most mileage out of the program is to really engage with us in the classroom or also outside the classroom. I think also is just making sure you're investing the time to cover the materials and do your best on the assignments. That's the best way to really get the best out of the program, is to put in the work. And I know that, that's probably the same advice you got from your parents when you were in high school or something. So I don't want to sound like a parent, but really that's the way it works, is you have to put in the time to get the most out of it. So it's covering the readings, coming to class prepared, and then engaging us in the classroom and engaging us outside the classroom is the best way to get most mileage out of the program.
Yeah, I would add one thing. I echo everything Sharon said. I think we are on the quarter system here at the university. This is just like a very, very practical nuts and bolts, I think, observation. And if you've not been on this schedule, our quarters are 10 weeks long. They go very, very quickly. And so my advice is always to just like reach out because those 10 weeks pass quickly and you'll get the best support if you reach out early. And so I think it's something that I try to make sure folks know before you get into the thick of the quarters, because they go by really quickly. And it was an adjustment for me as an instructor coming into this schedule. And I think for students it can be challenging if you're used to a semester schedule where things are a little bit roomier in some ways.
One thing I'll add is I think that flexibility is a really key attribute of successful students. And by flexibility, I mean being flexible and open to just following what's interesting to you and what you're passionate about. If I had a dime for every time I've heard a student say, like, I've never thought of myself as a numbers person, but I love budgeting and I'm going to take Sharon Kyoko's advanced budgeting class. Or every time a student says, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I love cost benefit analysis and I'm thinking about going into this highly technical field, even though I've never thought about that. And Elizabeth Figner teaches that class. That to me is like the best possible outcome of the program, is you came here with an open mind and you're exposed to these different ideas and you find a passion that you didn't know you had. And so students sometimes come in with a very clear idea of what they want, and that can be terrific. But sometimes I worry that that kind of narrow pathway that you've got envisioned for yourself leads you to miss out on just the really incredible possibilities that the MPA program offers. So I think that kind of spirit of exploration and flexibility is something that leads students to be really successful here when they're willing to embrace that.
These were all such great questions that we had. I had some like in my back pocket to be like if we didn't get questions, but we got lots of questions, my friends. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This was so helpful, I hope, to some folks, especially hearing straight from our faculty who are in the classroom with your fellow peers, potential, classmates that you'll have. Let's see, hold on. So many screens. 1 second. No, okay. So we are kind of rounding up around town, around time, but we'll be jumping into our mini information session soon. However, can we give another virtual round of applause for our phenomenal faculty for being with us today?